Every morning at precisely 8:30 a.m., the peaceful neighborhood of Pine Hill Terrace was pierced by a sound that began to stir concern, curiosity, and eventually unease. It wasn't construction, nor was it children playing or a car alarm blaring. It was a dog, not just barking, shrieking. Every time a pregnant woman named Liana Hayes stepped out of her house, the same dog, an old, scrappy stray with piercing eyes and a coat weathered by time, would appear out of nowhere and bark at her relentlessly. It didn't just bark like any other dog would. It was frantic, panicked, as if trying to scream a warning no one could understand. At first, people laughed it off. "Maybe he doesn't like babies," joked a mailman one morning. But day after day, the behavior grew stranger. The dog never approached anyone else. It waited quietly until Liana stepped out, whether it was morning, noon, or evening. And then it would snap into a frenzy, growling, howling, and pacing back and forth like something terrible was about to happen. Neighbors began to notice. Some found it amusing. Others were irritated by the noise, calling animal control more than once. But the dog was smart, elusive, and always managed to escape capture. Liana herself tried to ignore it, brushing off the barking as random aggression. Yet each time she looked into the dog's eyes, something stirred in her gut. It wasn't just noise, it was desperation. But in a world full of distractions and dismissals, no one paused long enough to listen. No one thought for a moment that the dog might not be the threat, but the messenger. What was he trying to say, and why? Only to her. They say animals have a sixth sense, an invisible thread connecting them to dangers, emotions, and truths that we humans often overlook. But what if a dog was trying to warn you of something you couldn't see? Would you listen? Would you believe it? Or would you, like most, just brush it off as noise? This isn't a tale of superstition. This is a story of urgency, a story of a dog who refused to give up, even when no one would take him seriously. A story that ends in heartbreak, silence, and a truth that came crashing down far too late. Radar, the dog, didn't know how to speak. He couldn't explain. The pain he sensed, the ticking clock he felt winding down inside the woman's body, all he could do was bark, louder each day, hoping anyone would understand. But they didn't. And when the police finally stepped in and realized why the dog had been acting that way all along, their faces turned pale with regret. Every second wasted, every bark ignored. It had all led to this one moment, a moment they could never undo. The question is, what was he trying to say? And why did no one listen? This story will make you question everything you think you know about animals, instincts, and life itself. Because by the time the truth came out, by the time the cries were finally heard, it was already too late. And once you know what really happened, you'll never forget it. Radar was not like other stray dogs. He didn't dig through trash, chase cars, or bark without reason. No, Radar was different, and those who paid attention knew it. In the quiet suburban sprawl of Pine Hill Terrace, he had become something of a local legend. A mystery wrapped in fur, with eyes that held secrets deeper than any human could guess. No one quite knew where he came from. Some said he had been abandoned years ago when a family moved away. Others claimed he simply appeared one day after a thunderstorm, soaked, skinny, but standing tall as if he had a mission. The children called him the Watcher. The elderly referred to him with a kind of reverence, noting that he always seemed to know when something was wrong. They named him Radar, not just because he had a keen ear, but because he picked up on things no one else did. He would follow lost kids and sit by them until help arrived. Once he reportedly stood outside a house barking furiously until the homeowner discovered a gas leak in the kitchen. Another time, he lay in front of a toddler who had wandered too, close to a busy road, refusing to move until the mother came running. He was no one's pet, yet everyone's guardian. Still, not everyone appreciated him. Some saw him as a nuisance, just another stray loitering around the neighborhood. But those who looked closely could see it in his eyes. Radar was watching, waiting, listening. He was more than a dog. He was a sentinel. And so, when Radar started, barking at Liana, people should have known. This wasn't a random tantrum. This wasn't noise. This was a warning. But they didn't. They just saw an old dog barking at a pregnant woman. Until it was too late. Years before Liana ever moved into Pine Hill Terrace, there was an incident. The kind of story that neighbors whispered about but didn't always believe. It involved Radar, a stormy night, and a woman named Mrs. Eloise Granger. Mrs. Granger was in her late 70s, living alone since her husband passed. She rarely left the house, and most neighbors assumed she had moved away. Until one night her lights went out during a lightning storm. Hours passed. No one checked on her. No one. Except Radar. He started barking at her gate. Relentlessly. He scratched the door, howled, then ran up and down the street trying to catch anyone's attention. Finally, a teenager named Milo opened his window and saw the dog pacing like a mad creature. Annoyed but curious, he followed Radar back to the house. Inside, Mrs. Granger was lying unconscious in her kitchen. A stroke had left her paralyzed, helpless. If Radar hadn't alerted someone that night, she would have died before morning. The story made its way through the neighborhood, though many dismissed it as coincidence. But Milo knew. Mrs. Granger knew. Radar had sensed something. Somehow he'd known she was in danger. That was when people began to truly see him differently, not as a stray but as a silent protector. So when Radar began acting out again, this time barking at Liana, the memory of Mrs. Granger's rescue flickered in a few minds. But no one took it seriously. Not this time. Because this wasn't a sick old woman or a gas leak. This was a healthy young pregnant woman. What could possibly be wrong? What indeed? The house at the end of Pine Hill Terrace had been empty for months, its shutters weather-worn and garden overgrown, until one morning, a moving van pulled in, and with it came Liana Hayes. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking. In fact, most people would describe her as quietly beautiful, the kind of woman who kept to herself but had a presence that lingered even after she passed. 30 years old, with soft brown hair often tied in a loose braid, and thoughtful eyes that seemed to carry more than just the weight of pregnancy. No one knew exactly why she moved into the neighborhood. Some said it was a job relocation. Others whispered about family drama or heartbreak. Whatever the reason, she arrived alone, except for the growing life inside her. Her pregnancy was unmistakable, her belly round and full, suggesting she was in her final trimester. Her steps were careful, her back a little sore, but she always smiled when someone greeted her. She didn't make many friends, but she wasn't unfriendly either. Just private, reserved, like someone who had learned to keep her heart protected. Behind closed doors, she was preparing for motherhood, reading parenting books, folding tiny clothes, and softly humming lullabies to a nursery that still smelled of fresh paint. Yet outside she maintained a quiet distance from the world. A woman rebuilding her life from something unknown but clearly painful. But her calm presence would soon clash with something no one could have predicted. Something far more jarring than anyone expected. Because while Liana was focused on bringing new life into the world, a dog named Radar had already sensed that something was terribly wrong. Liana kept her days simple, no chaos, no unpredictability. She followed a quiet routine, morning walks through the neighborhood, short grocery, runs to the corner store, and weekly prenatal checkups. She avoided anything that might raise her blood pressure or complicate her pregnancy. But peace didn't last long. It started on a foggy Tuesday morning. She had just stepped out, bundled in a coat, one hand resting on her belly. That's when she heard it, sharp, aggressive barking. She looked across the street and saw him. A dog, scruffy, alert, eyes locked onto her. He didn't bark at anything else, just her. She stopped. He didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on her stomach, and the barking grew louder, frantic, desperate warning. It startled her, but she kept walking, brushing it off as a random encounter. The next day it happened again. Same place, same time, same barking. It wasn't just coincidence anymore. It became a daily thing. Every time she passed that corner, he was there, watching, barking. At first she laughed nervously, even told herself maybe she smelled like something he didn't like. But after a week, the barking began to feel like an alarm, one that was only triggered by her. The neighbors began to notice. Some chuckled, others grew annoyed. A few even complained about the noise, but the dog didn't care. His bark cut through the street like a siren, unsettling and strangely rhythmic, as if it were tied to her heartbeat. Liana started walking faster. Sometimes she took alternate routes, but Radar always found her. His eyes never wandered. His bark never softened. Every time it was like he was trying to say something she couldn't understand. What could he possibly be sensing? And more importantly, why her? What started as confusion soon morphed into fear, and that fear into frustration. At first, Liana tried to stay calm. After all, she was pregnant, and stress wasn't good for her or the baby. But Radar's relentless barking followed her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Each time she stepped outside, it was there, loud, shrill, unyielding. His eyes drilled into her, and his voice rang with urgency no one could decode. She changed her route again, crossed the street, waited for him to disappear. But he never did. Not for long. Then one morning, as she stepped off her porch, Radar emerged from behind a tree like he'd been waiting all night. The barking started again, louder this time, desperate. Liana snapped, "Go away!" she screamed, the words cutting through the air like glass. Her hand clutched her belly protectively. Her face was red with anger, fear, and something else, guilt. Deep down, she didn't want to hate the dog, but she was exhausted, anxious, alone. She picked up a small stick and waved it, trying to scare him off. Radar didn't flinch, he barked harder. Neighbors turned their heads, some watched in silence, others murmured to each other. Whispers spread like wildfire. Maybe he just doesn't like pregnant women. Poor girl. That dog's going to scare her into early labor. He's always been weird. Maybe he senses something. The worst part? Liana didn't know what was worse, being barked at constantly, or being the woman people now pitied. She didn't want attention. She wanted peace. But Radar wouldn't stop. And something in her gut whispered that this was more than just noise. This wasn't about hatred. This was a warning she didn't yet understand. While Liana wrestled with her emotions, the rest of the neighborhood was growing restless. Radar had always been a familiar sight. A stray, yes, but one that most had grown used to. Some even loved him. Kids tossed him scraps. He'd nap on porch steps and never caused real trouble. Until now. Now, every day, his barking echoed down the block like a siren. And not just any barking. It was targeted. Specific. Always when Liana walked by. It divided the street. Mrs. Greta Bloom, an elderly widow who'd lived there for 40 years, was one of the few who stood up for Radar. A petite woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, she leaned on her cane as she told anyone who would listen. That dog's trying to tell us something. You don't ignore instincts like his. Mark my words, something's not right. But not everyone shared her patience. A young couple down the road filed a noise complaint. Another man, irritated from working night shifts, threatened to call animal control himself. And then it happened. Radar disappeared. For 2 days there was no barking. No familiar face by the corner tree. Liana noticed the absence like a hole in the air. For the first time in weeks, her walks were silent. But silence didn't bring her peace. It brought unease. A part of her had grown used to the dog's odd presence, as much as she hated it. And now that he was gone, it felt too quiet. Then on the third morning, just as she stepped outside, he returned, muddied, tired, but very much alive. He limped toward her from across the road, slower than before, but with the same urgent eyes, and again, he barked. But this time it didn't feel like a warning, it felt like a last chance. Radar was no longer just barking when Liana walked past. Now, he was stationed outside her house, every single day, Rain or shine, morning or midnight, there he was, pacing, growling low, then erupting into thunderous barking. At night, his howls pierced the silence like a cry for help, raw and mournful. He wasn't just alerting anymore, he was pleading. Liana stopped sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, Radar's bark haunted her dreams. She'd wake up in cold sweats, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other gripping the sheets. And then, the symptoms began. It started subtly. A tightening in her lower abdomen, a strange stabbing pain in her back, fatigue she couldn't shake off. Even after resting, she chalked it up to the late stage of pregnancy. But deep inside, something didn't feel right. Her instincts, sharpened by the maternal bond forming inside her, screamed that something was wrong. And Radar's increasingly frantic behavior only made that feeling stronger. One night, she approached the door and there he was, not barking anymore, just sitting, still, eyes locked with hers as if trying to speak. He scratched once at the door, not aggressively, but deliberately, then let out the softest, lowest whimper she'd ever heard. And that was it. She picked up the phone. When Officer Marcus Bell arrived, it wasn't with urgency, it was with annoyance. He was a seasoned cop, used to real emergencies, not stories about a psychic street dog. His boot stomped up the porch steps with authority as he adjusted his belt and glanced toward the fence. There he is, Liana pointed from the window. He's been barking nonstop. Something's off, I'm telling you, Bell sighed. I see him, just a mutt with too much time and no leash. He walked outside and approached Radar, who didn't run, didn't bark, just stared up at him, tail still, body tense. Hey boy, the officer muttered, nudging him away with his boot. Go on now. Radar growled softly, backing up but refusing to leave. Bell glanced back at Liana through the window and forced a polite smile. Ma'am, dogs bark, especially strays. He probably got attached to something. Scent, maybe. Nothing to worry about. But I am worried, she insisted. I'm having these weird pains. I don't know. I think he's warning me about something. Bell looked at her belly and softened. Just slightly. I'd suggest seeing a doctor then if you're feeling off. But the dog's not a threat. I'll file a report with animal control. If he's still around tomorrow, they'll come get him. And just like that, he left. Radar returned to the porch and laid down, not sleeping, not resting, just watching. That night, Liana stood behind the curtain and stared out at him, tears welling in her eyes. Something inside her was unraveling. A storm was building, not just outside her window, but within her body. And Radar, broken, desperate, loyal Radar, was the only one trying to stop it, but no one was listening. And the clock was running out. The sun was setting behind the quiet houses of the neighborhood, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the pavement. Inside her modest kitchen, Liana was moving slowly, her body heavy and weary from the day's exhaustion, her breaths short and uneven. She reached for a glass of water, but suddenly the room spun violently. Her knees buckled beneath her like fragile branches snapping in a storm. Before she could call out for help, darkness swallowed her whole. Her phone lay just beyond her outstretched, hand on the countertop, silent and useless in that critical moment. Outside, the night air grew thick and cold. Radar, sensing something terribly wrong, erupted into frantic barking louder than ever before. His voice cracked through the stillness, a relentless, piercing alarm that shook the entire block. Neighbors looked up from their windows, startled by the urgency in the dog's cries, but none could understand why. None but Radar himself. His eyes shone with desperation as he paced back and forth, scratching at the door, clawing at the windows. The barking turned into howls, a primal cry for help that no one could ignore. He refused to leave. He wouldn't let her suffer in silence. The piercing noise drew Mrs. Greta Bloom from her home. She knew this bark wasn't ordinary. It was the same desperate warning Radar had given for days, now turned into an unrelenting scream. Without hesitation, she grabbed her phone and called the police again. Minutes felt like hours as the sirens finally cut through the quiet night, flashing blue and red lights painting the street in urgent color. When Officer Marcus Bell and his team arrived, Radar was at the door, frantic, barking like his life depended on it. He circled the porch, growled at the locked door, and pawed fiercely. The officers wasted no time. They forced the door open. Inside, the scene was chilling. Liana lay unconscious on the cold kitchen floor, pale and motionless, her breathing shallow. The room smelled faintly of sickness and fear. They immediately called for an ambulance. Paramedics rushed in and began life-saving measures, their voices calm but hurried as they loaded Liana into the ambulance. Radar followed closely, pacing outside, never once leaving her side. In the flashing lights of the ambulance, Mrs. Greta whispered to the officers, "That dog knew. He tried to save her, but sometimes knowing isn't enough. Sometimes the warning comes too late." And in that haunting silence, the neighborhood realized just how brave and loyal Radar truly was. A guardian who refused to give up, even when no one else would listen. The sterile hospital room felt impossibly cold, despite the cluster of doctors and nurses bustling around. Machines beeped rhythmically, counting the precious seconds of a fragile life hanging in the balance. Dr. Emily Carter, a compassionate obstetrician, stepped forward with a grave expression. Her eyes met Liana's husband's, his hands trembling, clutching a chair's armrest. "There was a placental abruption," Dr. Carter explained softly. "It's when the placenta separates from the uterus prematurely. It's rare but can be deadly, especially if not caught immediately." Liana's world shattered in an instant. The doctors whispered that Radar's extraordinary behavior might not have been a coincidence. Dogs have an incredible ability to sense changes in human biology, subtle shifts in scent, changes in breathing, or even emotional distress. Radar's incessant barking, his desperation, his loyalty, could he have been trying to warn them about this invisible danger? A dog's instincts had outpaced human understanding, but the medical emergency had arrived faster than anyone could act. The room was suffused with a heavy, unbearable silence as the doctors delivered the hardest truth. Her baby had been lost. Liana's body had fought bravely, but her baby had slipped away in those critical moments when help was just out of reach. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks. She clutched her husband's hand, the pain of loss crushing her heart. Radar sat quietly at the foot of her hospital bed, eyes full of sorrow, as if mourning alongside her. The nurse handed Liana a small blanket, folded neatly, the last tangible connection to the child she never got to hold. Her strength felt gone, Borwine, but in that dark moment, a fragile flicker of hope remained. Liana had survived. Barely. She was alive, but her soul carried the weight of unbearable grief. Outside the hospital, neighbors gathered, sharing their sorrow and newfound respect for the dog who wouldn't stop barking. The dog who tried to save a life no one else could see was in danger. Radar's warning was clear. Heartbreaking, but undeniable. In the wake of loss, the community's heart quietly changed forever. As the haze of emergency care began to clear, Liana lay in her hospital bed, the reality slowly sinking in. The doctors carefully explained the timeline. Radar's relentless barking wasn't random. It had started the very moment the placental abruption began. That frantic noise outside her door, the scratches, the howls, they weren't just dog behavior, but a desperate attempt to alert someone, anyone. Her mind flashed back to those earlier days. Each time she pushed Radar away, shouted at him, or ignored his urgent warnings. The frustration that once filled her heart now twisted painfully into guilt. Tears welled and spilled down her cheeks uncontrollably as she whispered through sobs, "He was trying to save my baby, and I didn't listen." That simple truth weighed heavily on her. Radar's love and loyalty had been a lifeline, one she almost missed. She realized that sometimes help comes in the quietest, most unexpected forms. A dog's bark, a silent guardian pleading to be heard. Outside the hospital window, Radar stayed steadfast, a silent sentinel in the fading light. Days passed, but the dog refused to eat or leave. His eyes, filled with quiet sorrow and unwavering hope, remained locked on the doors where Liana had disappeared. Neighbors whispered stories of Radar's devotion, how he refused food, how he lay patiently, never straying far as if holding space for her safe return. In that stillness, Radar spoke a language louder than words, one of unbreakable loyalty, of love beyond explanation, of a bond so deep it transcended pain. For Radar, it wasn't just a dog's instinct. It was a promise. He would wait. He would protect, no matter what. And when Liana finally opened her eyes again, she found comfort in those steady eyes, knowing that through all the heartbreak, she had a guardian angel, 4 paws, and a fierce heart who had never stopped fighting for her. When Liana was finally discharged from the hospital, she felt fragile, like a broken vase, mended but still cracked. But the moment she stepped outside, a familiar figure was waiting. There stood Radar, his tail wagging hesitantly, eyes soft and filled with cautious hope. As she approached, her tears overflowed. Every step toward him brought a flood of emotions, gratitude, sorrow, and overwhelming love. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around Radar's neck, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry, Radar," she whispered through tears. "I didn't understand. You were trying to save us." Radar licked her face gently, as if forgiving every moment she had doubted him. That reunion wasn't just about a woman and her dog. It was about healing, a shared redemption between 2 souls who had both survived pain and loss. Liana knew in that moment that Radar was more than just a neighborhood dog. He was family. Without hesitation, she took him home, opening her heart to the loyal guardian who had never given up on her. From that day on, Radar never left her side. At night, he curled up beside her bed, his steady presence a balm to her weary spirit. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, a living testament to love, trust, and second chances. Together, they found healing in their shared journey, proof that sometimes the greatest heroes come on 4 paws, barking warnings in the darkest hours, waiting patiently for us to listen. And as Radar rested his head gently on Liana's lap, the future felt a little brighter. A new chapter born from tragedy, woven with hope and unconditional love. In the weeks and months that followed, Liana transformed her pain into purpose. Determined that no one else would have to endure what she did, she started a small community awareness group called Listen to Their Warnings. This group focused on educating people about the incredible sensitivity animals have to human health and emotions, especially pregnant women. Liana shared her story, opening hearts and minds to the silent messages often overlooked. The neighborhood's attitude shifted completely. Radar, once seen as a nuisance, became a beloved guardian and symbol of hope. Neighbors who had once called animal control now greeted him with smiles and gentle pats, their respect deepened by the truth they had witnessed. Months later, a brighter chapter unfolded. Liana was seen walking through the same neighborhood, a hand resting tenderly on her growing belly. Radar trotted faithfully by her side, his tail wagging with quiet pride. The sunlight danced through the trees as if blessing their new beginning. A gentle voice echoed, capturing the story's soul. Sometimes the loudest cries for help come from those who cannot speak at all. Have you ever felt that animals can sense things beyond human perception? Have you witnessed a moment where a pet or animal seemed to warn or protect someone in an inexplicable way? Share your stories and thoughts in the comments below. Your experience could inspire others. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more emotional, true stories that celebrate the incredible bonds between humans and animals. Together, let's learn to listen, not just with our ears but with our hearts.